Good evening, everyone. Greetings, family. Welcome to IKG's Wisdom Wednesday. I am your host, Ajwa, and we are so happy and pleased that you are joining us this evening for what we know will be an extraordinary and informative Wisdom Wednesday presentation. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone that this is a webinar, so your cameras are automatically off and your mics are muted. We do ask that you engage with us via the chat. At the end of tonight's program, we will have a Q&A session, and we ask that you place all questions for our speaker in the Q&A box. As always, we do ask that you let us know where you're checking in from so we can shout you out. So as those comments are coming in, I do want to just let everybody know what IKG Wisdom Wednesday is. It is a free monthly lecture series that we have every third Wednesday of the month here on Zoom webinar, where we feature speakers that discuss topics related to Black, African American history, culture, spirituality, politics, finances, all areas of people activity and topics that are important to us to help build us, the individual, our family, our communities, and ultimately our people. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to shout out a few of the people who are in the chat. Welcome. We have family joining us from Lawrenceville, Georgia. We have South Carolina in the house. Welcome, family. North Carolina is also checking in. Of course, Washington, D.C. We are based here in Washington, D.C. So, of course, we always have family from the DMV checking in. Thank you. Atlanta, Georgia. We have Danbury, Connecticut. I always get excited when someone from Connecticut is checking in because that is where I'm from. So, yes, Connecticut representing. Thank you. We have Vancouver, Canada in the house. Thank you for joining us. Let's see, we got Southampton, founder and president of the Southampton African American Museum. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We have Fairborn, Georgia checking in, Silver Spring, Maryland checking in. Let's see, College Park, Maryland, Chicago, Illinois, Chi-Town. Thank you for joining us. Inglewood, California. Thank you for joining us. We have let's see, Glendale, Maryland, Atlanta again, Hotep family from the Sankofa Leadership Academy in Paterson, New Jersey. Thank you for joining us. New Jersey again is in the house. Jackson, Mississippi, Michigan, Fort Myers, Florida. So as you can see, we have people checking in generally from all over the globe, definitely all over the United States. And so we are excited that you are here with us. As always, want to make sure that you all check out IKGculturalresourcecenter.com to learn more about IKG and especially to learn more about our upcoming 2026 study tours to Egypt. There will be two taking place, one in the summer and a second one in December. And those will be the last two study tours being facilitated by our director, Tony Browder. So you definitely don't want to miss it. But there is the Ancient Egypt Light of the World annual study cruise, which will take place in July of 2026. And then there is a second study tour in December 2026. So please go to our website for more information. Now I'm going to ask our presenter for this evening, if he can please join the screen. Join us online. We are here with Baba Kamau Sadiki. Yes. Okay. And he'll be speaking on, spiritual archaeology and ships of African enslavement, and understanding of the intersections of history, memory, and spirituality. He writes, spiritual archaeology is an emerging field that seeks to uncover, interpret, and honor the intangible aspects of historical sites and artifacts, particularly those linked to traumatic histories, such as the Transatlantic era of African enslavement, or TEAE. When applied to the study of the so-called slave ships, spiritual archaeology goes beyond the physical remnants, like shipwrecks or recovered objects, to engage with the emotional, cultural, and spiritual legacies left by the millions of Africans who endured forced passage across the Atlantic. Tonight's presentation will highlight the spiritual archaeology and history around a select few of the more than 12,000 ships that participated for more than 3 centuries in the most horrific crime against humanity, the transatlantic era of African enslavement. There will be some discussion on the importance of historical knowledge and keeping your ancestors in memory to avoid historical erasure. Kamau Sadiki is a board of directors member and lead instructor with Diving with a Purpose, or DWP, an organization committed to resurrecting the stories of shipwrecks involved in the transatlantic era of African enslavement through underwater archaeology documentation. He is a certified professional association of dive instructors, Divemaster, with more than 1,600 open water scuba dives. He was featured in the cover story of the March 2022 National Geographic magazine and companion podcast entitled Into the Depths, that explores the work of DWP and the exceptional journey of Nat Geo explorer Tara Roberts as she follows Black scuba divers across the globe in search of shipwrecks involved in the transatlantic era African enslavement. Kamau is a retired civil engineer and a certified 200-hour Jivana yoga instructor. He is a licensed general aviation pilot with over 400 hours of flying experience. He also enjoys river kayaking, playing the djembe drums and acoustic guitar. He is a proud father of 2 adult children and a recent first-time grandfather. Congrats. And he resides in the state of Maryland. And just want to note that that is a short bio. He is also an author. He has been featured as does speaking engagements around the globe, and he has been involved in very important underwater archaeology around slave ships. And I'm going to now turn it over to Brother Kamau for what we know is going to be a great presentation.
So thank you so very much, dear Audra. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's actually a tremendous honor to be back here in Wisdom Wednesday. You all are doing some critical work in informing our global African community, and I'm just privileged to be a part of that and make somewhat of an offering to that work. So thank you so very much. So good evening, everyone. So thank you so very much to you as well for tuning in this evening. Hopefully I can make it worth your while. So I'm going to share my screen and we can sort of get started right away. Now, before we do get started into the essence of the presentation, I'm going to take a few minutes to do something that I think is very appropriate and
Excuse me,
needed.
Bala. Do you want to go to the black screen?
Yes, I'm going to go to the black screen. So as soon as I finish this quick comment, as I was saying, I need to take a few of your minutes to acknowledge what I call my egungun. That is my personal, historical, and even ancient ancestors that has guided me and influenced me, and whom I call on regularly for profound guidance. So with that, hopefully, as well, you see the black screen.
I do. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we will get started.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Ocean. Yeah, yeah, yo. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Ocean. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, shoot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, shoot. Yeah, yeah, Oshun is the spirit of the river. Open your hands, she's a sweet and steady giver. She'll turn your tears of sadness into gladness. Praises to Oshun. Yeah, yeah, Oshun is the spirit of the river. Open your hands, she's a sweet and steady giver. She'll turn your tears of sadness into gladness. Praises to Oshun. Yeah. Creator, Ptah, Olodumare, Odumakoma, and Yame, Ama, Neter, all traditional African names for the one God. Abosun, Orisha, Loa, Neteru, aspects of the divine, Ensamanfo, Sheps, Egungun, ancestors on whose shoulders we stand. Black notes, libation, a spiritual offering, a prayer with props to God, to earth, with water, fire, air, breath of life of the Creator, divine presence, wisdom, how, connecting us to ancestors, Queen Nzinga, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Malcolm X, Stephen Biko, connecting us to ancestors, struggles to progress, past to present, enlightenment to African cultural, spiritual space, gracing the cosmos, the universe with aspects of the all, encompassing our entire being, singing in harmony with joy, in pleasure, beyond measure, in passion for life, voiced like the song of the river, flowing with the sensual grace of Oshun. Oshun, Heru, Nana AC, Oshun, representing the beautiful, the feminine features of life, lightly dancing to a timeless rhythm, in tune with the tone of a spiritual offering, a prayer with props to the highest, down to earth with water, fire, air, breath of life of the Creator, divine presence, wisdom, power, like the nucleus, the core, black, sweet, black, woman, energy, strength, black, ash, energy, complementing, black, woman, energy, unifying, connecting us to ancestors. Martin Luther King, Queen T, Imhotep, Zumbi, David Walker, Nat Turner, Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, Fran Hampton, George Jackson, Bob Marley, Peter Taj, John Henry Clark, Fela, Anikulapo, Kuti, connecting us, the ancestors, struggles to progress.
So, as you know, I appreciate your patience with that acknowledgement of mine, Igungun. As you notice, I finished that piece with a bas relief of an image of Ma'at, which stands for truth and righteousness. And as you notice, as probably noticed as well, it was chiseled out, an attempt to erase the truth. And so from the very ancient time to the present, this erasure process has been going on. So you ask the question, why? From my simple analysis is that there's something very, very powerful that is within your history and culture that some want you to deny and not connect with. So hopefully you will connect with it and you will push back on these attempts to erase us as human beings and the power of our story. So I'm going to begin this presentation of spiritual archaeology and ships of African enslavement, an understanding of the intersection of history, memory, and spirituality. So this presentation is sort of going to be based on my experiences as a scuba diver, doing underwater archaeology documentation work on the materiality of the artifacts that has tremendous amount of trauma and violence embedded in them. And these primary artifacts are from what I call the Transatlantic era of African enslavement. These are forgotten stories, and they have very powerful emotional and spiritual triggers to them. And I've experienced them firsthand, and I'm going to share these stories with you this evening because we are all storytellers. I'm just one of many. And it's very important for us to be a storytellers in this moment, even going forward. I have a dear friend in South Africa that always say that if you want to change the story, we have to change the storytellers. So that the narratives about us as a people have been told by others, and now we need to seize the moment and tell our own stories. So with that, let's begin. As I said, I'm a scuba diver. And as we mentioned, I have over 1,600 dives in the open ocean as a scuba diver. And approximately a quarter of those dives, about 400 or so, has been on shipwrecks that was involved in the enslavement of our ancestors, or that period that I call the transoceanic era of African enslavement. So I've sort of sensed the presence, if you will, of our ancestors among this materiality, these artifacts that we call so-called slave shipwrecks. As a scuba diver, I have to acknowledge this individual. He's still with us well into his 100th decade. He's in his 90s, Dr. Albert Jose Jones. He started scuba diving back in the early 50s as an African American, as a Black man. You can imagine the challenges that he was confronted with. But Dr. Jones certified me as a scuba diver, and I'm extremely proud that I have his name on my dive certification card. And Netflix has just did a documentary on his life and legacy called The Black Godfather of Scuba Diver. If you have an opportunity, please check it, the life and legacy of Dr. Albert Jose Jones. Just a little bit about DWP, and then we'll dive into the meat of this presentation. As it was mentioned, I'm on the board of Diving with a Purpose. I'm a lead instructor in the underwater archaeology program. I've been with them for almost 15 years now. And what they basically do is take certified scuba divers and teach them the skill sets of how to document a shipwreck site, if you will. But our special focus is on the protection and documentation and interpretation of so-called African slave trade shipwrecks and the maritime history and culture of African Americans who form the core of labor and expertise for that time period. We teach them these skill sets of how to do a survey, how to identify artifacts, technique of measurement we call trilateration, how to develop in situ drawings of what actually lies on the seafloor, and put it all in a map, like a picture, if you will, of the seafloor that's been drawn, if you will, by these divers. And we also do the research on these vessels. Even before we start diving them, we hit the archives and get more documentation and information on these wreck sites. Another piece of our operational program is coral reef restorations. We have a very powerful program called CARES, Collective Approach to Restoring our Ecosystem. And my colleague and buddy, lead instructor as well, Kramer Wimberly, he's done an incredible job in setting up this program, particularly a focus on young people. Does it globally. They're getting ready to go to South Africa. It's been in Honduras, Costa Rica, and of course here in the States. So they do coral reef identification, identify coral reefs that's in distress. They do surveys, including fish and coral, and upload that information to a database so that information can be studied and analyzed. So the work that they're doing is extremely critical. And it's even, I can even say life-saving, because every second breath of air that you take come from our oceans, and those coral reefs provide a tremendous amount of oxygen that comes out of the ocean. So this is very critical work and important work as well. As I said, they focus on young people and doing coral reef restoration. They work with organizations that actually teach the young people how to grow these corals on coral trees, and then they outplant them on reefs that are in distress. And you can see from this photo, these are staghorn corals that are beginning to proliferate from that outplanting. The scale is very small, needs to be scaled up tremendously, but it's making a difference, and also teaching these young people to be stewards of the maritime environment as well. DWP, we work in partnerships as well. We work collaboratively with the National Museum of African American History and Culture. These African American history and culture as part of the Smithsonian Shipwrecks project. And we have worked with other partnerships as well, like the Society of Black Archaeologists, to do this work as well. As it was mentioned, we was featured in the March 2022 issue of National Geographic based on the work of Tara Roberts, who we introduced to SCUBA, and she took off and just elevated the space that we were working in DWP. She wrote a book recently called Written in the Waters that features her journey. It talks about her journey and pursuing us all over the globe doing this work. I encourage you to read it. It's a very powerful read. Tara is a very powerful writer, and she's doing some incredible work. And I would definitely say stay tuned. There's some things that's coming up that's going to be tremendously impactful on this work that Tara is doing under the auspices of the National Geographic. She's the National Geographic Explorer in Resident right now, almost like the #1 explorer at Nat Geo. So she's doing some incredible work in exposing us and the work that we're doing. So, but before we dive into this notion of spiritual archaeology and this whole discussion in general, we have to sort of decolonize the false narrative. And this one that I'm very passionate about. My colleague and brother friend in Chicago is writing a book on this idea. It's called That We Were Never Slaves, that our ancestors were never slaves. We were forced into this enslavement by a global system of racism, white supremacy. It was a condition that was forced upon us that we resisted and struggled against. It is not our identity. So, but it is a period that we have to engage and deal with because it impacted so many of our ancestors. So that's where the notion of the Ma'afa is. It's a great disaster that happened to us. And so I reframed this idea of the so-called transatlantic slave trade, and I call it the transatlantic era of African enslavement, or the transoceanic era of African enslavement, because there were enslavement of African people in the Indian Ocean as well. So this whole discussion of semantics and how we tell our story and reframe the narrative is critically important. This brother Ali Musa Aye, who is a Djiboutian political anthropologist and co-founder of an organization he called Afro Perspectives, he said we cannot really heal ourselves if we continue to use the same language that caused our harm. You know, we cannot heal if we continue to remain within the same paradigm and perspective that generated the language that dehumanized us as human beings. We cannot fight racism, global white supremacy without changing the vocabulary through which racial prejudice is expressed. So it's not a question of semantics, but of ethics, justice, and reparations. Healing from the traumas of the past means emancipating ourselves from the narratives of others that has perpetuated them and the terminologies that recall them. So I've consciously erased out of my mindset this whole notion of, quote, us being slaves. We were incredible human beings. We was artisans, philosophers, metallurgists, griots, agriculturalists, profound thinkers, etc., etc. So the language that we use as we shift this narrative is critically important from my perspective. And so we all recognize the trauma and the murder and the torture and the violence that's unthinkable, unparalleled in human history that happened to our ancestors. And how we talk about that, we cannot whisper about it. We cannot be shameful about it because millions, tens of millions of our ancestors are dependent on us to tell these stories. So we have to speak clearly and with a loud voice on what happened to us and our strategy to not only heal ourselves, but also repair in terms of how we seek justice from this tragedy that happened to us. So when we talk about this, we cannot talk about it like our ancestors was docile, that they just simply walked on these vessels of enslavement, came to the Western world and worked joyously for no pay in these fields. There was resistance. There was incredible resistance. And we always have to focus on the idea that our ancestors resisted daily to reclaim their humanity and their dignity, didn't want to be enslaved. So that historical record is very, very clear. They resisted, they revolted, and they rebelled all the way from the moment their lives was invaded to the coast of West Africa, the crossing of the Atlantic, and the rebellion and resistance here in the so-called Western Hemisphere, from the Caribbean to the States to North and South America. So the resistance piece of this narrative is critically important. And they resisted in many, many ways, from taking up little simple arms to even taking their own lives as a form of resistance to maintain their dignity as they transition into ancestor. And you've heard of some of these resistances. Simbe Pe, on the Amistad, you've heard of him, of course. Nat Turner, he resisted. And Zumbia Palmares in Brazil, who resisted and established communities based on African principles and ideas in the hills of Brazil. So this history is history of resistance is very rich and important for part of this narrative. So we've had this experience, and our ancestors had this experience of horror and violence and trauma, and it has affected us to this very day. And this idea of a transgenerational epigenetic trauma is very real, because we're seeing it played out in these behaviors and the way we treat each other today. So generally, it's this epigenetic trauma in Black people. It refers to the potential for historical and ongoing trauma, such as enslavement and systemic racism, that causes epigenetic changes that can be passed down through generation, impacting, again, our health and our behavior and our social life in many, many ways. So it's up to us to really understand the system that caused this trauma, that continues to cause this trauma, for us to recognize that system and change our behavior accordingly. It's very important for us to do that. And once we recognize that we are impacted by a global system, not just here in the U.S., but a global system of white supremacy, racism, and understand how that system works, we'll know how to treat each other, how to interact with each other, and actually heal and do what is necessary to reclaim and reestablish our own dignity and humanity. And we had some great teachers that taught us how this system works. Mr. Neely Fuller, Dr. Francis Grass Welsons, and others have laid it out for us. And so it's all we have to do is do the study, put in the work, and understand the system. And we'll be on a good path, a clear path of reclaiming our humanity. So, but it's about memory. We have to know what happened to us. So that's part of our memory. And as we engage this material and these studies and these histories, We cannot be silenced about it. There's nothing shameful. We didn't create this condition. We didn't impose it on ourselves. So nothing for us to be shameful about. It is for us to remember, to embed it deeply in our memory so it never ever will happen again. This Marfa was a great disaster, a tragedy that happened in the history of people of African descent. So it should be centered in our memory so we know how to go forward in the future, because without memory, we essentially don't have a future. And Toni Morrison laid it out in his poem, all waters have perfect memory. All water has perfect memory. It is forever trying to get back to where it was, like, the hydrologic cycle, they call it. So it's related to water and the beauty of water, and we have to reestablish that relationship with this water. Derek Wilcock codified it in a poem as well. This is just one stanza from it. A Caribbean poet, I think it was from St. Vincent, if I'm not mistaken. But he said, bones soldered by coil to bones, these mosaics, mantled by the benediction of the shark's shadow. And Lucille Clifton also used this notion of our ancestors on the Atlantic seabed, saying that Atlanta is a sea of bones, my elegant African, connecting Ouida, which is in Benin, and New York, a bridge of ivory, seabeds, they call it, in reference to the many Africans that lie on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. During the crossing, there were some 2 million, some say 1.6, 1.8, but we always have to adjust those numbers a bit. But the estimate is about 2 million African souls are now lying on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, lost to memory. We need to keep those ancestors in memory. How do we memorialize them? How do we acknowledge them? How do we raise their voices? 2 million just in the Atlantic alone. We're not talking about the deaths that occurred on the continent of Africa and the US, but just in the waters of the Atlantic alone. Some 2 million ancestors. So with that sort of context, this ideal of spiritual archaeology, as we engage this materiality around the transatlantic era of African enslavement, I can say very personally that there's a presence immersed in this materiality, right? So as is defined now, it's sort of an emergent sort of space in archaeology that seeks to uncover, interpret, and honor the intangible aspects of historical sites and artifacts, particularly those linked to traumatic experiences, such as the transatlantic era of African enslavement. When we apply to study the so-called slave shipwrecks, spiritual archaeology goes beyond the physical remnants, like the wreck or the objects themselves, but to engage with the emotional, cultural, and spiritual legacies left by the millions of Africans who endured the forced passage across the Atlantic. So spiritual archaeology does not negate doing the actual science, doing archaeology. Yeah, the tangible piece where archaeologists cut, measure, evaluate, analyze, conserve, etc., etc. That's critical work to have deeper meaning as well. But there's a whole nother dimension that we're missing. And that dimension I call the spiritual dimension. And it's part of this idea of connecting with that intangible ideas. And if you know anything about African cosmology, that intangible is critically important to understanding the total perspective, the total idea of what's actually happened, particularly with this materiality around the transatlantic era of African enslavement. There's this Australian archaeologist that did some work with the so-called Aboriginal people in Australia. And he said that when dealing with shipwreck sites in which people have perished, and awareness of the spiritual element is vital if the best outcomes for the site to be attained. So we know this, we're aware of this, but very rarely you read some of these archaeological reports, they don't even go there actually. So we're missing a vital piece of information, particularly about our ancestors when we talk about these shipwrecks of the transatlantic era of African enslavement. And our good brother, Dr. Wade Nobles, sort of laid this notion of spirit, of spirituality, if you will, around this ideal of spiritual archaeology. People ask me, how old I am, and I typically respond that I'm immortal. I'm actually immortal. And what that means is that I'm not trying to be funny or sarcastic. It means that I always be. My being has always been and always will be. And the way Wade Noble sort of laid it out, so right now we are human beings, human beings that having a spiritual beings that are having human experiences right now. So, and to show the immortality of this ideal is that before we are born, if you will, we're yet to live. We are still spiritual energy. We are beings in a molecular concentration of potential and possibility. And just by the coincidence, there's nothing coincidental, but just by this awesome odds of 1 in 300 million, 1 in 300 million odds, you emerged as a human being, experiencing this spiritual being having this human experience. I'm well into my 8th decade of having this human experience, and of course I'm enjoying it. But at some point I will transition. So as I have this human experience, that Wade Novus call it a living spirit energy. We are still beings, and its concentrated essence in material form manifests for a particular purpose. You had 1 in 300 million chances of being here. So you have a profound purpose for being here with those kind of odds. And after you transition, you come after living spirit energy of being also. It is the invisible expression of the essence of spirit energy, vibrating and radiating at different unseen energy levels as ancestors. So therefore, all that exists are different concentration of being, of spirit, right? And that's how we sort of see the world. We are beings forever. We are immortal. And Dr. Nobles go deep into this ideal in his book, From Black Psychology to Science of Being in Shia. So I encourage you to check that out. So these shipwrecks, we treat them as very sacred sites. Our ancestors, in many cases, have lost their lives. You know about the tremendous trauma and the violence, the murder, the rape, just the total violation of human spirit that happened on these vessels. So we have to acknowledge that when we're doing this work, because we have to have the ability to make a connection with our ancestors, because they are speaking to us in this space, in these spaces where all this horror happens. So the way we go about doing that is the photo on the left is a scene in Mozambique where I'm carrying out a ritual, a water ritual to invoke the spirit energy of Yemenya, Olokun, and Momewata. Every participant that's part of this mission goes through this ritual. I have water from this space, from this ocean, and we allow them, I bathe them essentially in that water, give them either a cowrie shell, and in the lower left there, what we call manillas. The cowrie shells and manillas was used as the total value of an African life that was used to trade these African beings. So we take those objects and put it in our diving, what we call buoyancy compensation device, and take it with us so we can make this ancestral connection. As we go out, Yemenya protects us on the surface. And as we descend into the water to these sites, Olokun is the Orisha, if you will, of the depth. And Mama Wate protects us all over the ocean, wherever we are. So it's a very powerful ritual for us to sort of go through so we can open up our senses to be receptive, because when the ancestors speak to us, they're not speaking to us in English or Portuguese or Spanish, and you won't be able to hear them with your ears. You have to listen with your spirit and with your heart, and they will speak to you. and they will guide you. And I'll offer some examples here later on how powerful that is, because I'll talk about in a moment how many ships that was involved in the trade and how many that we're aware of right now. So it's only about 15 or so that we're aware of right now, and only about 10 of those or so has been documented. And I have the very humbling privilege to dive on 6 of those wrecks and do work on 6 of those wrecks that was involved in enslavement of our ancestors. So the spiritual essence in this material is very real, but it's silent, but you can hear it if you do the work and the rituals to allow our ancestors to speak to us. It's embedded in these artifacts, in the shackles, in the material, the wood, the fasteners, the nails, the floor, the cells. It's all there, and you can experience it, and you can hear, and allow those ancestral voices to guide you. So they are speaking through us. And again, I'll show an illustration of that, of my experiences. As I said, I'm speaking from my experiences only, but I think these experiences can be shared by anyone that's doing this sort of work. So, but before we continue, let's get a clear idea of the role of the so-called slave ship and how it played in collective memory and spiritual archaeology, because these ships are central to the whole phenomena of the transatlantic era of African enslavement. And Marcus Rediker wrote this book called The Slave Ship, and in it, he sort of laid it out very clearly. Of course, I won't read all of that, but I think it's insightful for you to know that the expropriation of millions of people, and the redeployment to capitalistic markets all over the world, the mining of gold and silver, cultivation of tobacco, etc., and finally a planned accumulation of wealth and capital beyond anything the world has ever witnessed that led to very powerful capitalistic systems of the day. So slowly, fitfully, and eventually, but with undoubted power, a world market and international capitalist system emerged. Each phase of the process, from exploration to settlement to production to trade and construction and a new economic order, required massive fleets of ships and their capacity to transport both expropriated laborers and then all the commodities within. And the central piece of that, he said, was the Guineaman, the so-called slave ship, was the key value piece of that whole system. It's important for us to understand that. And so what kicked the process off was an executive order, if you will, from the Pope, from Pope Nicholas V. He issued an edict saying, Portugal, you have the right to go out and discover and explore the world and bring the infantiles to Christianity and enslave them and let them work on your behalf. You have to subdue them, all the non-Christians, initiating what became known as the so-called doctrine of discovery. And Portugal took it literally. If you look at the data in terms of Africans leaving the continent and disembarking in the Western world, then the latter part of the 18th century, if you see what's highlighted in red here, they imported almost 4 million of our African ancestors. Academics say it's about 12.6 or 12.4 was the total number, but we know it's much, much more than that. I think that number is conservative. But anyway, whatever number you use, 4 million over a 25-year period. The irony now is, as part of this narrative, you go to Portugal and listen to their story of their involvement. You won't see any memorialization of their involvement in the transatlantic era of African enslavement. In Portugal, I've been to Lisbon twice, and it's a huge struggle to get them to even recognize their involvement. So we have to continue to tell this story so it doesn't get lost, and don't rely on others to tell this story. So just as a background and context, as I said, there was some 12,000 ships involved in the trade. They made some 40,000 voyages across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. There were some 1,000 plus shipwrecks that we know of. And about 15, as I mentioned, and less than 10 that we know are known, and less than 10 has been scientifically, archaeologically documented. And my number is some 15 to 20 million captured human beings was involved in the trade. John Henry Clark said it was something like 50 million. So, but in a context, it was an incredible maafa, the largest forced migration, if you will, and the most barbaric treatment of human beings in human history. So how can we not have that in the forefront of our memory, of our consciousness and our awareness as we go about our daily lives through this global system of white supremacy? And to provide further context, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, who is now the secretary of the Smithsonian, he was the moving force behind the establishment of the National Museum of African American History and Culture and establishing the SlaveWorks Project within that museum, whom we work with. He put things in sort of a context in terms of understanding countries and how they tell their stories. He said one can tell a great deal about a country by what it chooses to remember, the memory piece, by what graces the walls of its museum, by what monuments are venerated, and by what parts of its history are embraced. One can tell even more about what a nation chooses to forget, what memories are erased, and what aspects of its past are feared. Again, we see this process played out today. As I said, it's been going on under the global system of white supremacy from ancient times to the present. But it's up to us, again, to be the storytellers, to tell our own story and create our own narratives. This good sister, Dr. Ayana Omalali Fluellen, she's an associate professor of anthropology at Stanford University. She's also a colleague, and she sits on the board of Diving with the Purpose as well. But she's doing some incredible work around water right now, trying to bring back these memories and tell these stories of the relationship between water and the African American experience. She has a project of getting Black divers, if you will, to dive on these monuments and then capturing their thoughts and feelings from that experience. We was recently in Key West, Florida. There's a monument down there off the coast of Key West. The National Association of Black Scuba Divers memorialized our ancestors that was on the Henrietta Marie back in 1992. Actually, the monument was put down in 1993. It says 92 here, but the initial, they couldn't go up the 92 because of weather conditions, etc. But actually, the monument is there. And after these Black divers learned of this ship while they was having a conference down there in Florida, they said, we need to memorialize our ancestors. And they did. And this plaque that's on the monument down there, it reads, in memory and recognition of the courage, pain, and suffering of enslaved African people, speak her name and gently touch the souls of our ancestors. So Dr. Fluellen, we went back down there in June of this year, and we tried to locate the monument. That was 92. I think it was revisited again in early 2000, but since that time, it has never been revisited. And so we was wondering what condition it was in, and is it possible for us to even locate it? It's a long ride out. So this is a quick video of us. Actually, that's me there in the black, rediscovering this particular monument. And what we're planning to do as divers is to have an annual pilgrimage to this monument to pay our respects to our ancestors that were on the Henrietta Marie. I think that's critically important for us to be doing that work. You can see it's still in very good condition. You still can read the inscription on the monument. So we'll be cleaning it up just a little bit more, and as we plan these pilgrimages to this monuments for these Black divers. This is how it looks now in June 2025. So the Henrietta Marie was a British vessel that deposited some 220 odd Africans in Jamaica, and it was trying to get back to Britain with its loot and its treasures. But as it was trying to turn the corner out from the Florida Keys, a storm came up and it sank. There's a museum in Key West called the Mel Fisher Museum that's done incredible work and documenting this wreck site. And we know for sure it's the Henrietta Marie because of these artifacts here. This is the bell here. If I can do a quick switcheroo, give you a sense of what that bell looks like. This is the bell here. Let me know if you cannot see it, but it says the Henrietta Marie 1699, and it was found on the site of the Henrietta Marie. And also, shackles was found there as well. These are bar shackles. Thousands of shackles was on the Henrietta Marie when it was found there. If I can give you just a shot of that shackle real quick, and this really brings it home when you interface with these artifacts. This is called a bar shackle. And this particular technology of photogrammetry and 3D imagery really puts it in your face and allows us to see it in tremendous detail. And you can imagine whoever feet or legs the shackle touch, that their essence is right there in this shackle. And this is it's called a cauldron. It is the big pot that that they cook the gruel, the food, if you will, of that our ancestors ate. And this is it here. Again, it's just a big pot made of lead and pewter. That the food that they serve our ancestors in was cooked and prepared in the huge pot, and they just scoop it in out of basically corn mush and water, and this is what they had as their daily diet. So let's try to restore some memory around some of these vessels, and we'll wrap it up. If I ask you to name at least 3 vessels of enslavement, there was some 12,000, remember? Can you name at least 3 of them? Not looking at the list here, but if you can name 3 of them, that would be wonderful. But if I say, to show you the impact on our memory, if I say the Wanderer, or the Jesus, or the Glorious Jenny, would you know what I'm talking about? But if I say the Nina, Pina, and the Santa Maria, you would instantaneously say, oh yeah, who created that storyline for you? Who controlled that narrative? Neither one of those vessels of Columbus touched the shores of the Americas. But the Wanderer did, the Glorious Jenny did. Why don't we know about those vessels? Who did the erasure for us not to know those vessel contribution to present day? So let's just take a quick look at some of them, and then we'll try to wrap it up. The Guerrero was the founding vessel, if you will, for diving with a purpose. It was a Spanish vessel that was hijacked, if you will. Some 500 Africans or so were hijacked from a vessel of enslavement off the West African coast by these pirates, and they was trying to take them to Cuba. But there was an English vessel, and this happened after 1807, 1808, when the U.S. and Britain supposedly was trying to block the importation of Africans into the Western Hemisphere. The British vessel pursued the Guerrero. They ran into a reef down off the coast of Florida near Key Largo. 41 of our ancestors drowned in that event. But overnight, these pirates put together a scheme to hijack about 350 of them and took them on into Florida to enslave them. So they left about 120 or so, that was taken into Key West, Florida. And about 90 of them end up in Liberia because the U.S. had colonized Liberia. There's so much more to this story. I'm trying to be a bit brief here because of time. But we were in Liberia just last December, and we connected with some of the descendants of those 91 Africans that was on the Guerrero. And I tell you, it was an incredibly powerful spiritual connection to connect with those direct descendants of the victims that were on the Guerrero. This is our program manager, Ken Stewart, who got this whole mission around the Guerrero started back in 2004, 2005 when he was down in Florida. And now, you know, he's thinking that we want to memorialize the Guerrero as the founding project of the Guerrero of diving with a purpose. Although we haven't definitely found like the bell you saw from the Henrietta Marie on the wreck site of the Guerrero, but we got a pretty good idea based on some of the work of NOAA and others, and we assisted them with this work in the National Park Service of where the Guerrero lie. But we're not absolutely sure, but we got about 90% confident we know where it is. So Ken wants to, you know, memorialize them and we move on. These are some of the artifacts from the Guerrero. This object here is called a bar shot. I'm sorry. It's called a bar shot, and a bar shot was basically it's a armament, it's a bullet, it's a cannon sort of used in cannons where they stuff them into the cannon and they blast them out of the cannons and it flips over and over and it tears up the riggings and the sails and blasts through wood and other things. Give you a sense of what it looks like. This is a bar shot here. I'll turn it on the side here. You can see it from all the angles. Yeah, very destructive piece of artifact. So these bar shots was used by these pirates and others to overtake these vessels of enslavements. This is called a demijohn bar, a bottle, if you will. And on the Guerrero site, we found this neck, which is on the left side of this photograph here. This is a demijohn jar on the right. It's very possible that the lips of our ancestors touched this jar, or it might have been used just as an export item, or it might have been used just by the crew. We never know, but it's very likely that liquids from this jar was provided by the enslavers to quench the thirst of our ancestors. And this is, again, a close-up of that demijohn jar. You can see the detail around the neck, which is important in identifying it. So this technology gives us great ability to do the analysis and then think about, you know, the spiritual aspects of these artifacts. So this is the site where those 91 art Africans came ashore down in Key West, Florida. It's called Higgs Beach. And when the vessel arrived here, several of the Africans had died, and they buried them right here on Higgs Beach. And around 2002, another phenomenon was discovered that also on Higgs Beach, there's some 1,500 graves on this beach, roughly. 1,500. If you ever been to Key West, Florida, I encourage you to visit Higgs Beach. I said 1,500. There was 1,500 on these vessels that was caught and brought here, but about 300 was buried here on the beach here. Unbeknownst, this was in 1860, but it was unbeknownst to the public until about 2002, when an archaeologist was looking for the remains of the victims of the Guerrero. And so a very powerful monument has been put down there on Higgs Beach to remember, memorialize those ancestors. Another vessel that we need to keep in memory is the São José Paquete de Africa. It was a Portuguese vessel that was sailing from Mozambique to Brazil, trying to get to Maranhão, Brazil, but it stopped off in Cape Town. A big windstorm came up and blew it into the reef here, these rocks here. And this right along this beach, you can see these lush condos, but right where this rock is where 212 of our Africans ancestors lost their lives. It was the very first documentation of a vessel of enslavement where Africans actually lost their lives. I worked directly on this project with the slave wrecks projects for several years, and just show you some of the artifacts that came off of that vessel. This is called ballast stones, and these artifacts actually is on display in the African American Museum the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. But the essence of our ancestors are in these artifacts. And this is my first experience of really experiencing that presence, if you will, of our ancestors. When we dive these sites initially, we do a survey sort of dive, and the waters here are very cold. It's around 45 degrees, but we had to do the work. There's surge, the water is pushing back and forth. There's a lot of sediment and kelp is in the water. There's even some great whites come visit every once in a while. But I remember doing that survey dive and coming across this wooden piece here that's trapped in these rocks. And that was my first visual, if you will, of seeing an artifact, a materiality from these shipwrecks. And I just recall grabbing it and touching it. And instantaneously, I felt this horror and the scream and the pain and suffering of our ancestors. That was my experience. And I remember it vividly. That was 2013. I still remember it vividly to this very day. And just to show you the power of how the ancestors speak to us when we die. This is Dr. Kinole Molopane. She was, at the time in 2013, a graduate student at the University of Witwatersrand. Now she's done some critical work on a cave system in South Africa called Rising Sun. You should check her out. What's so important about the Rising Sun cave system is that it's providing evidence of our ancestors having transcendental thought, where they ritualistically buried their dead 300,000 years ago. That's absolutely incredible. But Kenny, at the time, as a graduate student, she was my dive buddy on that trip on the South Sea in South Africa there off Cape Town. And she's very playful. And I was doing some dredging. We have these machines that we dredge some of the sediment off the seafloor to uncover some of the sandy bottom because we know there's materiality buried in that sand. And I was working among these rocks and she tapped me on the shoulder. She kept tapping me and pointing. I said, no, we got to work here. We got to work here. We got to finish this. So she just continued to tap me. Look, look. And what was caught her eye was this abalone shell. And you can see its iridescence. And the wreck site is about 30 feet. And so the sun rays was penetrating and causing this iridescent sort of reflection. And she was amazed by that. She said, come, let's go see. And I said, no, we got to work here. And so I finally relented and went over there. And I started, it was near this rock, and I started dredging among this rock. I didn't find anything initially. And I looked back over where I was before. I didn't want to go against the current to get back over. There was a lot of work. So I continued dredging. In about 2 minutes, I discovered a shackle. Totally unplanned, all because the serendipity, playfulness of whom we call Kenny. Maybe the ancestors were speaking to her and calling us, you need to be here. And that's where we found this shackle. It was a bar shackle, an amazing, amazing discovery. So the Sanctuaries, they came from a place called Mozambique District in Mozambique, around this island here. It's called the Ilhas de Mozambique, the island of Mozambique. A little bit more about that later, real quickly. So once we find, I'm pretty sure of a shipwreck, what we like to do is go back to the village of these, the descendants of these victims of the shipwreck, and tell them that we found their ancestors. And we did that in this case of the Makua people in Mozambique, Mozambique District. And that day, Dr. Bunch was with us, the Smithsonian folks. It was a huge day of celebration. And this Makua elder, he went and got some sand from some dirt, some earth from the village and put it in that carousel basket that he's holding in his hand. And he gave it to Dr. Lonnie Bunch and told him to take this dirt from our village, from the home, back to that wretched site and bring our ancestors back home. It was a very powerful moment. Everybody was in tears, and Dr. Bunch couldn't even speak. So he gave the material to me, and we went back to South Africa, and the intent was to dive on the site and deposit the soil, but the seas was rough. This is the last visual leaving Mozambique District down this so-called ramp of slaves. And this is the last visual in the lower right there that their ancestors saw of their homeland. So we went back, and you can see the sea was very rough that day. There was news media from all over the world there. So we waited out myself, South African. This is Tara on the left. In the middle, there's Makua's sister. Her name is Yara. And we represented diaspora. And we ritualistically went out, waded in these rough seas because we couldn't die because of the roughness. And we began to deposit the soil onto this site and bring those Makua people, the spirit of those Makua people back home. Again, it's another very powerful moment. And after we did that, we returned to the Makua village and told them that we have fulfilled your mission. Your people are home now. And there was a very pregnant moment with this elder after we went back and told him that we completed the mission. And he said, now that you all have done this, you reconnected us to our ancestors. And to be disconnected from your ancestors is a very powerful thing because you wander around misguided without guidance from your ancestors. But now they are reconnected. And he said that now when it rains on that village, it is like the tears of our ancestors watering our fertile soil again. A couple of more here, and again, really we'll wrap it up. The Zong Massacre, you might have heard of this. The Zong Massacre, there was a vessel that was really known as the Zorg, Z-O-R-G. It was a Dutch vessel, but it was bought by the British and renamed the Zong. But it's a horrific story where over a 2-day period, because of an incompetent captain misnavigated, 132 African men, women, and children was thrown overboard alive in a nefarious attempt to collect insurance for a lost cargo. They tried to collect insurance when they got back, eventually found their way back to Jamaica. They didn't have enough provisions once they got lost way out into the Gulf of Mexico. So when they turned and came back to Jamaica, they tried to claim the insurance on these victims. 54 Africans was chained together and thrown overboard, and 2 days later, 46 more was thrown overboard, and 26 more was thrown overboard before reaching Black River, Jamaica. And in that process, when these ancestors saw what was going on, 10 of them said, I'd rather take my own life and be honorable. Another vessel that we should have in our memory is the Lewiston. It's a horrific story that we need to have deeply embedded in our memory. It was a Dutch vessel that in 1737 it left Elima in Ghana and trying to get to Suriname, but because again, an incompetent captain, it went up the wrong river, the Moroni River rather, supposed to be going up the Suriname River to get to Paramaribo. And when it came out, reverse course and came out at the delta of the Moroni River, a storm, you think it was a hurricane, came up. The captain saw that he was going to lose control of the vessel, so he asked the crew to drop anchor. They anchored in. The winds of the storm swung the vessel around and slammed it into the reef and started taking on water. This was a massive vessel with over 700 of our ancestors on it. The captain saw that he was going to lose the vessel and gave the order to abandon ship. But the order before he told the 90 crew members to abandon ship, he also told them to lock down the hatches. In over 2 or 3 day period, 700 of our ancestors, whether they could swim or not, perished and fell into the sea as the vessel broke up. Who's going to remember them? Who's going to acknowledge them? It's critically important for us to tell these stories. This is the island of the Ilhas in Mozambique I spoke of earlier. It's a beautiful island, about 2 miles long off the northern coast of Mozambique. It has about 14,000 primarily Makua people on it. It's just about 2 miles long, about a half a mile wide. But it has some rich, incredible history to tell. On that island, just like the demographic across most of Africa, is primarily young boys. Over 50% of them are young men, and with very little to do. The art form, the martial art form of capoeira has been introduced on the island. It has been very helpful for them. And here's them doing what's called capoeira regional. You can see that they're very proficient at it now. The one on the on the left side there. He was didn't want to go to school. He thought his life was hopeless. And Capoeira has given him a new purpose, new meaning to do something with all the energy. And they're not doing Capoeira. They have to kind of pry on the tourists, but Capoeira has given them a new energy. I'm a former, I'd say former, but I was doing Capoeira heads and all. I'm a contra master of Capoeira heads and all. And so when I saw them doing Capoeira, of course, I'm in my 8th decade of a human existence, but I got out there and gave it a go. And it sort of inspired them. And although not like I was back in the day, but it was really a very powerful moment to be able to participate with them doing Capoeira. Yeah, this is the slow version here. But it was again very insightful. And that's the woman that I'm doing yoga playing with there. She's from Portugal, and she brought this idea. She's the mastery we call of Capoeira heads and all. So I'll finish up with this one, and I'll talk a bit about the Clotilda, and we'll call it a wrap. So from reason I showed you the images of Mozambique, that island, there was a boat, another vessel called the Aurora, that departed that island back in 1789, at least attempted to depart the island back in 1789. It was near the island. It came from the district that you saw from the South Jose, Musaril district there. It was trying to get across the Musaril Bay around the island and head out into the Indian Ocean. But our ancestors resisted. There were some 700 or so Africans on this massive vessel. Unfortunately, in the wrecking event that happened, this show you exactly where the island is located there. And this is the island here. And the location of the Aurora wreck site this is the island to the center left here. And this is where the Aurora wrecked. Our ancestors rebelled, divine intervention or whatever. A storm came up as well. The crew lost control of the ship, and over 400 of our African ancestors lost their lives in the wrecking event. And so this is some of the artifact materiality that we've discovered from the Aurora. And when we see this underwater, it's very, very powerful. What you're looking at here is basically the side of that massive ship that had 700 of our ancestors on it. And we believe that since the discovery of this piece here, this is the hull, the side of the ship that you see embedded in the seafloor here. But we think because of the huge tidal surges that the entire ship has been buried. And we're trying to excavate and expose and study some of this materiality here. You see another a look at it, a view from the top. You're looking down like on the side of the ship. I think I got another view here. This outlines the planking, the inner planking inside of the ship and the outer planking outside of the ship. And it's all nailed together through these frames or ribs, we call them. Yeah, this graphic here shows you exactly, you're looking at this part here of the vessel. So it's an incredible find. This is so like a photo mosaic of the whole site thus far. And what I just showed you is here on this side here. But you think this is maybe the back part of the vessel, and the same type of material or structure is on this side as well. So we might be looking at the back part of the ship, of what we call the stern section of the ship. So I'll finish with the Clotilda, which you might have some familiarity with. Another very powerful story of resilience and memory embedded in materiality of our artifacts. The Clotilda is a story of the last so-called vessel of enslavement that brought Africans in this country. It came into Mobile, Alabama, on July 7th, 1860, bringing 110 Africans into the U.S. There's incredible documentation about this voyage. So the historical data is very clear that it happened. And these are the main perpetrators: Timothy Meare, who made a bet that he can pull this off in 1860. If you can remember the atmosphere at that time, Time context is important. It's just a few months before the start of the Civil War. William Foster was the captain, and he did it under the ideal of a deception that he was going to some market and to St. Thomas, but he sailed on to Ouida and what was Dahomey at the time, now Benin, and brought these 110 Africans back to the U.S. And this is a replica of that of the Clotilda. And so after they brought them into the U.S., the federals, because it was a federal violation to do that, and you can be hung if you violate that federal law, they decided to get rid of the vessel by burning it. And this is the deposition of William Foster, the captain, who said he transferred the so-called slaves to a riverboat and sent them upriver into the bushes or the cane brakes or the swamp, the cane breaks of the swamp, and to hide them until further notice. And then he did the unthinkable and tried to burn the vessel. He set it afire, but fortunately, it didn't fully burn. So the descendants of that vessel now exist in Africatown here. And this is give you a location relative to Africatown. This is the city of Mobile. Right to the north is Africatown. And right up the Mobile River, where this island exists, a 12-mile island, is where they tied off the Clotilda near the Meir property, Timothy Meir's property, and tried to destroy it. I think we have a descendant, or maybe several descendants online here listening to this presentation that they can tell you more about it. There's an Africatown Descendants Association that's doing critical work to keep this work in memory. There's been some good documentations on this. I highly encourage this book, The Slave Ship Clotilda, written by a scholar who was at Hampton University, Natalie Roberts. She did some incredible research back around 2006, 2007. Another piece by Sivian Doof, Dreams in Africa, and a British scholar that tracked down the stories of the survivors of the Clotilda and wrote very eloquently about them. You can read their stories there as well. But what really set this in motion, I'd say coincidentally, but there's no coincidence. At the same time that we was working on the Clotilda and announced the finding, Deborah Plant found the manuscript of Zora Neale's work, Barracoons, and archives of Springard Library at Howard, and she published it that same year. So it was a very powerful moment for those two things to converge. So this is Africatown. There's a highway that runs right smack down through the center of Africatown. The state and the city tried to destroy it. Environmental racism, economic racism, etc. use every sort of tool in their racist arsenal to try to destroy Africatown. And right under this bridge is where the descendants believe that was the landing of the Clotilda. And there's an annual celebration every July to celebrate that landing. The materiality of the remaining of Africatown is just this chimney that was part of the survivor, Gumper Peter Lee. Is there right off the highway. You can see the highway to the left there. This is the church that was founded by Kazula, so-called Cujo Lewis, one of the survivors of the Clotilda back in the latter part of the 20th century. And this is here memorializing him in front of that church. The church still exists as it did back in the day, if you ever go down there. And this is a memorial to Kazula in Benin. That's a very old cemetery there. This is a memorial of Kazulu in that cemetery, not his exact grave mark site, but we know he's out there somewhere along with other descendants of the survivors of the Clotilda. A very important space. And this is where the Clotilda lie, that buoy marker that marks the bow of the Clotilda. And this riverfront here, land here, is owned by Timothy Meir, the ones who perpetrated the Clotilda caper. There's a fishing house here, right about there. You see a little boat there that they own them. Also, there's a property marker that says Meir on it as well. In May of 22, we went back to the site and did some detailed archaeological work. This is Dr. Jim Delgado here, one of the principal investigators for the work we did back in May of 22. We extracted some 94 artifacts from the site. We cataloged them, and we put them all back except 4, because there was so much meaning and essence to those 4 artifacts, and they're being conserved right now. And one of them was this, and this piece here in the upper right here is called uh, a pulley. It's a pulley, and you still have the rope embedded in this pulley, and it's part of the steering system that was used to guide the rudder of the Clotilda. So it's a very important piece of artifact, and the spiritual essence of this piece cannot be underestimated in terms of how it engaged the water. These are some side scan sonars from the Clotilda. This is one that was earlier, 2018. You can see debris that's impacting the shipwreck. Trees come down and impinge themselves on the shipwreck. Back in roughly 1959 or so, the Mears, who was very, very racist, the family has been closed-mouthed about this. They don't even want to talk about it, but there are some conversations that are going on now. But in 1959, they tried to destroy the whole wreck and by blowing it up. And we saw that damage of explosives being used on the wreck. We saw evidence that the wreck was attempted to be burnt as well. This is after we cleaned up the wreck back in May of 22, removed some of those trees and exposed the wreck in more detail. This is called a side scan sonar image. And let me just add that this is probably, of the 12,000 ships that was involved in the trade, this is probably the most important one, the most valuable one, the most critical one in terms of telling the stories of our ancestors. Why is that? Because all those 12,000 wrecks, very rarely, if ever, of the ones that we know about for sure, you do not see an outline of a ship. You have materiality and artifacts that's scattered across a wrecking site. But with the Clotilda, you can actually see the outline of a ship. And more importantly, and critically more important in telling the story, this space here, this is the actual hold, cargo hold, where the 110 endured that horrific crossing of the Atlantic. No other artifact exists in the human record, in historical record, in terms of doing this work. So it's a very powerful, sacred space. And I had the humbling experience of diving into that space to experience, at least feel that space, to experience and sense the presence of what it's like to be in such a space as they experience it. So to give you a little context before I talk about the dive, the visibility is virtually zero. You're looking at the bow of the vessel here, so you can barely see it. Hold your hand in front of your face about 6 inches, you can probably see it. There's water moccasins in the water, there's current, and there's also artifacts that have sharp edges to it that can impel you. So diving this vessel is very dangerous, but I knew we had to go into that hole to really get a sense of what our ancestors experienced. So again, you can see a side of the vessel here. It's very difficult to see, but again, a very powerful, important artifact that we have to stay connected with. And so I think she's on. My dear friend Sabrina Johnson knew that I had that experience on the Clotilda, not the Clotilda, but the South Jose in South Africa off the coast of Cape Town. And she said, Kamau, if you're going to dive into that hole, you need to acknowledge, find some way to connect to those 110 ancestors. So she composed a prayer, and I tweaked it a little bit and say, before you go into that space, you need to recite this. And here I am about to go into the Clotilda, the whole of the Clotilda, and I'm reciting that prayer. I just want to share with you just real quickly. It says, beloved ancestors, your voices have been quiet for 162 years. It's about 165 now, but your silence ends now. Your voices and memory are lifted now from this wretched vessel through us, and we welcome you to speak through us. Our connection will never be broken. We are because of you. Thank you for reaching out to us. Blessings to your spirit always. And so I made the descent into that hole. And yeah, just getting goosebumps thinking about it now. It was an incredible experience, to say the least. And the way once I went over the side of the vessel and into that space, as I said, I had about 1,600 dives in open water. I couldn't find my balance, what we call peak buoyancy. Once I got in that space, I just tumbled for about 10 to 15 seconds before I got my orientation. And that was my invitation for them to give me a sense of what it's like to be in that space. We interrogated the space. I had a dive buddy. My colleague, Jay Hagler, was with me. I was leading the dive, and we interrogated the space archaeologically. The floor is gone, but the post that holds up that floor is still there. So there's still material essence there. Actually, there's actual DNA of those ancestors probably still in that vessel, on that and trapped in those woods and that other materiality that was there. So we can still remember them, and we remember them by calling out their names. And so if you like, I invite you now to bring back into memory some of the 110 of the Clotilda by calling out their names. And we call out their names to remember. We call out the name of Olali Kazula. Call out their names and remember them. We call out the name of Adoshi Sally Adams to remember her, what she sacrificed for her. We call out the name of Kupoli Poli Allen. Remember him. Keep him deep in your memory. We call out the name of Zuma. Call out her name. We call out the name of Osakibi. We call out the name of Abachi Claire Turner. We call out the name of Charlie Lewis to remember him. We call out the name of Gompa Peter Lee. We call out the name of Matilda McCrae. Call out this sister's name again, Matilda McCrae. In the 1930s, she walked some 40 miles or so to petition the county seat to pay her for the free labor that they benefited from while she were enslaved. Walked at the age of 74, 75 to the county seat over 40 miles in Alabama. Matilda McCrae, we honor you. And as we remember, we say Ashe, 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 oh, and always will remember them. So if you're ever down there in Mobile, I encourage you to go by the Africatown Heritage House to learn more about the story of the Clotilda. And some of my colleagues, scuba instructors, we're training young folks how to scuba down there. We just trained about 4 young people to scuba dive, and they're very excited. I think the youngest one was about 12, and the other ones were 2 college students. This is my colleague Jay Hager, is one of the main instructors down there. So I end with this. You know, if we want to tell these stories of these vessels of enslavement and understand the importance of the spiritual essence of this materiality, it's up to us to tell these stories. As I mentioned earlier, you read all these archaeological reports on these vessels, you hear nothing about the humanity of these people, except for the Clotilda. We did put a chapter in the report for Clotilda about the spiritual essence of this materiality. So I encourage you to learn more about these vessels. I offer you to go to our website, divingwithapurpose.org, to learn more about our work so we can keep our ancestors in memory. Because until the lions learn to tell his story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And I say, Asante Sana, thank you very much, and always keep your ancestors in memory.
Okay, yes, Yebo, Madasi, thank you. Fantastic program presentation. As you see, there are hearts and claps coming through the chat, family. We are getting ready to move into our Q&A for the evening. We're going to try to take about 5 to 7 questions or so. And as the questions are steady coming in, I do want to share that this presentation will be available on YouTube in the next few days. So just give us some time to get it up, but you can watch it again on YouTube. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Our first question is from Rhonda, and she asked, Brother Kamau, I have always loved scuba diving. My question for you, how do you determine where to dive for the history of our ancestors? Is this shown to you in spirit, as you referenced earlier? And she adds, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rhonda, for that question. How do we determine, these locations for where to do this work? I left out the story of several other vessels that is of critically important. So Rhonda, a couple of things happen that are important. One, when we hear of these stories and we hear about them in various ways through research, through news articles, etc., etc. But once we catch wind of them, we begin to go a little deeper. And one of the primary sources that we go to is the people are, in a lot of cases, they're descendant communities from these vessels. As I showed you in Africatown, there's a very powerful site in Brazil called the Camargo. There's a descendant community there, Quilombo actually. Uh, we go and talk to these people, and the fisher people of the community, they know about these wrecks. They know about these wrecks. They've been fishing on them because they attract a lot of marine life. And so we connect with them, get their oral stories, and we do deeper investigation by going to the archive and trying to essentially vet, if you will, some of these stories. So to answer your question, Rhonda, we do archival work, we do oral research as well, and also we to verify that it's worth the effort and investments. These efforts are extremely expensive. We have to make sure that we do have a viable site, and we do some preliminary work like doing magnetometer surveys. That is there any metallic material on the bottom of the seafloor? And we have devices that we can run across and identify where those anomalies are, and we investigate those further by diving them. And if we come up with something that sort of infer that this could be the site, we take it to the next level and put together a plan to document the wreck. But great question. I appreciate it.
Okay, and now I'm going to follow up with that question with another comment that Rhonda made. She also wrote that she can only imagine the memory of water surrounding our ancestors that you and your team must have experienced. So I'm going to go off of that point and ask, can you share um, any experiences or kind of how you feel when you are diving and you're encountering these ships? What is that experience like spiritually, emotionally, mentally for you and the other divers?
Mm. Oh, that's yeah,
Heavy, yes.
yeah. Yeah. I'm just recalling recalling some of those experiences was just giving me goosebumps right now. I just shared a little bit because I didn't want to get too emotional here when I talked about the South Jose, but that presence that I spoke of, Adjoa, is always there on every dive. Uh, I feel it, I sense it because I have the memory, right? And as I said in the presentation, the memory piece is extremely important. You can dive these sites as a scientist and don't give a, a, S about what you're doing. Just want to do the science and write a report, and you're gone. But there's so much trauma, there's so much loss of life there that you cannot ignore it. And so that spiritual dimension, by being present, by doing the rituals to connect, doing the appropriate rituals to connect to those ancestral spirits that's on those sites, um, you'll be able to feel and sense that energy, that presence of our ancestors. So it's profoundly emotional in a lot of ways, particularly when you got 300 to 400 Africans that lost their lives in one space, in one drowning or wrecking event. It's extremely powerful. So the South Jose, um, the Aurora, the Camargo, and then others. Well, it wasn't loss of life on the Camargo, but it did bring 500 Africans into Brazil. So it's very palatable. You feel it, you know it, and mainly because of memory. So we have found ways to kind of mitigate or control the emotions, to do the work, to be able to tell the full story. But you cannot deny it for sure. The experiences that I've had has validated that for me and connected me to a deeper level to these ancestral spirits and their presence. And I can feel and listen and hear their voices speaking to me. And in some ways, they guide me in doing this work. And I relayed the story about with Kenny and finding that shackle. Um, so yeah, the emotional piece is very, very powerful.
Okay. And around that piece, Maria brings up the first slide that she says the first slide showed the ancestors standing in a row, shackled together. Is that what we were seeing? How do I deal with the physical feeling of grief? So maybe her, how do you deal with it? How do members of the team,
Hmm.
how would you encourage those of us watching this that may get those feelings of grief? What would be your recommendations?
Yes, yes. So you have to find ways to not let it overwhelm you. I mean, we have to confront it. I mean, if we want to deal with this, we have to confront it. And there's a lot of grief and emotions that comes with that. And so we have to find ways to to mitigate that. And for me, what I do, I tell myself that I'm doing the work to raise their voices, to bring them back into memory, and it and it must be done, right? So, um, yeah, I use those memories to guide me into this work. We can't forget them. We cannot forget them.
Thank you, thank you. There's such power. We can all feel it. You can see the hearts coming through the power of this. Even when you did the last slide recalling the names, I just got an immense sense of chills just from that alone. Um, so again, the work is so incredibly important and powerful. We thank you. We thank you for doing this, and we thank you for listening your to your divine spirit and moving as you've been called to do. It's a great work. Jason asked, he says, I am currently an archaeologist for an indigenous tribe in South Florida, and I want to devote more time to African and or African American archaeology. Do you know of any archaeological volunteer opportunities in South Florida?
Great question, Jason. Yeah, we have a strong partnership with NOAA, with the Florida National Marine Sanctuary. But Jason, what I would encourage you to do, with somewhat of a pitch here, is to come to a diving with a purpose session. We hold sessions every June, first week of June. And 2026 is going to be May 31st to June 6th or 7th, something like that. You can go to our website, divingwithapurpose.org. Um, we have limited capacity of about 30 divers, but if you have at least 30 dives and good peak buoyancy skills, we will instruct you how to do this work. Matter of fact, I encourage you to, connect with me offline. You can connect with me at my first initial last name, ksadiki@gmail.com, and we can talk more about how we can get you engaged. But yes, there are many, many opportunities.
Awesome. Another question coming from Brenda. She says, Kamau, when I met you, I was finally able to express experiencing my feelings of a relationship to mermaids. Can you
Mm.
talk a little about how that might be related to this topic And we know you brought up some spiritual aspects earlier. I think you mentioned Mami Wata, so
Mama
I'll
Wata,
let you
yeah.
go there. Yes.
Yeah. Mama Wata, there's a lot of, Brenda, there's a lot of connectivity here, particularly when we think about Mama Wata and what that spiritual energy represents. Um, uh, I don't know if you all saw the Avatar, The Way of the Water. That idea was taken directly from our story. Although that's kind of peripheral to Brenda's question, but the ideal of mermaids, of beauty, um, having this essence of living in the water, which Avatar, Where the Water was all about, and this whole underwater uh, society of African people called Drexia, where these African women who went overboard and was pregnant crossing the Atlantic, either they was thrown overboard or committed suicide, very much pregnant, and they gave birth underwater. And those children from those births never had the opportunity to breathe air, so they live underwater and create civilization underwater. So like a Wakanda underwater, if you will. And so that's what, Avatar, Where the Water was essentially all about, telling our story in the skies. So Brenda, yeah, the ideal of the mermaid and Mama Wata is very fascinating in doing this work, and the spirituality of and the meaning, even if it's imaginary in some senses, is very important for us to understand and fully embrace. Um, these experiences in the water. I've had some incredible experiences in the water. Diving for me has become a meditation, actually. Um, Particularly when I'm not working on these wrecks, but diving otherwise in these beautiful, beautiful spaces. It's a deep, transformative meditation, and using breath. I believe Mama Ayo is on here as well, using breath to bring about that sort of presence, and even using breath to connect ancestrally as well. So I don't know, Brent, if that answers your question, but the ideal of the mermaid and beauty and the sense of surviving underwater is part of this work as well, and doing the spiritual um, work underwater.
Wonderful, wonderful. So there's a couple of questions around kind of some next steps. So first, is there a documentary, Henry wants to know, on the Ma'afa, or are there some books that maybe you would recommend for those new to learning about the Ma'afa?
Sure. Yeah, I do have a bibliography. I should have posted it. But there are several books. I did show a few of them during the presentation, and there is a good documentary on the descendants of the survivors and descendants of the Clotilda, and it's called Descendant, and it's still streaming. It came out in October of 22, but it's still streaming on Netflix. I encourage you to watch that. Um, Nat Geo has done several documentaries on our work. Actually, they just did a full-length film it's called The Clotilda, The Return, about some of the descendants going back to Benin and having that experience. So I would suggest starting with Descendant, and it would give you a pretty good resource or perspective on the story of the Clotilda and survivors and the descendants of those survivors. But
Okay.
I'm sorry, I mentioned barracoons
Mhm.
because when barracoons, it's not someone interpreting or writing about, trying to analyze. It is the voice of Cujo Lewis speaking in his own voice, in his own dialect. And I would encourage you to read Barracoons if you haven't already, by Zora Neale Hurston.
Wonderful. And our last question for the evening, I'm going to combine, is from Afia and Basil. And Basil writes, this is truly interesting and an informative information session. Have you accumulated enough information to consider writing a book sometime in the future. And Afia wants to know the same thing. When is your book coming out? So she's putting it out there. So
Thank you,
we
Afia.
can,
You know, writing is always a challenge if you know anything about the writing process. And I have at least three books conceptually in my head. And just you asked that question, Afia, because just last week I ran across a publisher that wanna help me out. So yeah, the first one is on this topic of spiritual archaeology and my experiences of doing this work for sure. And hopefully I can get that process started. I've got stuff written up, but it's not in a manuscript sort of form. Um, so yes, I'm thinking about trying to publish something and leave that legacy here for others to analyze, reference, and enjoy. Um, and just real quickly, the other one deals with the life and legacy of my mom. My mom is 96 years old, but she has an incredible story to tell. She's still in good health. Very blessed for that. She texts me daily. So, but she has an escape story from oppression in the South, South Carolina, that that needs to be told as well, just for genealogical reasons, personally, but a broader story of determination and will to live. It's an incredible storytelling. And the last one, which I've been playing around with, as you know, I'm a retired engineer, and I'm trying to codify this whole ideal of African origins of science and mathematics, a new paradigm for scientific thinking. So those are three books that's percolating, Afia. And if you can help me out in any way, please give me a call.
wonderful. Well, family, I told you that tonight was going to be a wonderful presentation, and indeed it is. And it's so funny how things are just connected. So, the song that you played in the beginning, Yeye Oshun, so one of the singers, she will actually be presenting next month at our Wisdom Wednesday, December 17th. So I invite everyone to come back out for Dr. Michelle C. Chapman, also known as Iya Omu Olufina, and she will be speaking on healing, protecting, and strengthening the Black family. Everyone, tonight's program again will be uploaded to Karak Browder's YouTube page. And Brother Kamau, thank you so much for this amazing presentation, for just sharing so much of this with us, of your story with us. And we definitely look forward to the various manuscripts that should be coming out. We look forward to hearing more about that. And we definitely invite you to come back out anytime, but definitely when those publications are available. And before we finally close out, just want to ask you if you have any closing remarks, any final words for the evening.
Yeah, just to bring it total 360, Ajua, I think you and the Institute of Community Guidance, IKG, for doing this work is very important, and for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences. So thank you so very much, and I just implore all the folks that's still on to always keep your ancestors in memory and listen to them as they try to guide you through this madness. Be vigilant. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, wonderful message. All right, family, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next month, December 17th, right here on Zoom. Have a great evening, everyone.